So now we're ready to focus on the lower half of the infographic. And as you can see, it focuses on two specific areas, solar energy and wind energy. Now I'm going to toggle to the final PDF here for a moment because you can see that behind the solar energy and wind energy boxes, there is this nice little background. For the solar energy one, I have what looks like a solar panel. And then for the wind energy one, we have some waves. So in this movie, we're going to cover how we can add both of those. The solar energy one is one that we're going to create on our own from scratch. And the wind energy one is one we're actually going to take from some of the patterns that ship with Adobe Illustrator. Again, when you're using Illustrator, it's really important to realize that to be efficient, you don't always have to create your own artwork. It's very easy to take or repurpose either clip art or some sample art that comes with the program. So let's switch back to Illustrator and get started. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to create the solar energy background. That's basically taking a solar panel and putting it into the background. I have a pretty good idea about what a solar panel looks like, but just to be sure, I actually went online, I went to Google search, and I typed in solar panel and searched on images. It gave me some good reference material to know how it should look. Again, in this case here, I'm using it as a graphic in the background, so even a general idea is going to be good enough for me, but it's always helpful to do some research to know how something actually looks. Now in older versions of Illustrator, meaning CS5 and prior, creating a pattern required you to first create your artwork and then drag it into the swatches panel. And you had to visualize how it was going to repeat, so quite often you were doing that process over several times until you got it right. But with Illustrator CS6, Adobe added a pattern definition feature, which makes it really easy to create patterns. So I'm going to go over here to the Object menu, I'm going to choose Pattern, and then I'll choose Make. And two things happen. First of all, Illustrator gives me this dialog box telling me that a new pattern has been added to the swatches panel. That's great. I'm just going to click OK. But you can see now that everything else in my document seems to have disappeared. This is because I'm now in some kind of an isolation mode. I'm defining a pattern, so everything else in my document seems to temporarily go away. Even if you take a look at my Layers panel, you can see that I'm now in isolation mode, dealing specifically with this pattern. Another panel also opened up on my screen called the Pattern Options panel. And this is going to allow me to specify certain options when working with my pattern. Now you can see that I have this blue box over here, this outline that appears in the middle of my screen. And that defines the repeat area of my pattern. I'm going to go to my Pattern Options panel. I'm going to make a few settings here. First of all, I'm going to change the name of this. Since these are the cells, I'm actually going to call this one Solar Cells. Next, I want to define the exact repeat area on my own. I'm going to actually use a value of 1 1/8 inches, so that's 1.125. I'll hit the Tab key and type in 1.125 and Tab again. Now I want to draw a rectangle, so I'm going to take my rectangle tool, I'm going to click over here, and I want to create an exact 1 inch by 1 inch square. So to type in 1 inch, 1 inch, and click OK. And a few things have happened here. First of all, Illustrator will automatically put my square right now in that little repeat area. That blue box does not actually print. It's just identifying what the repeat area is. But Illustrator has also created multiple copies so that I can preview how my pattern is going to look when it steps and repeats over and over again in the background. I'm actually going to change the fill color of this to be black, and the stroke should be set to none. And you can see that the copies that Illustrator is creating are dimmed back. They're currently set to be dimmed back 30%. I think the default value is 70% inside of Illustrator, but I like to use a lighter color so I can easily make a difference between what I am actually working on, what my artwork is, and the ones that Illustrator is just previewing for me. By the way, where it says copies here, it's currently set to 5 by 5. That's Illustrator showing me 5 by 5 as the background. Again, almost like 5 repeats of my pattern. I can change that by clicking over here on these options. If I do 1 by 1, all I'm really seeing is my artwork itself. So I'm actually going to use this setting for now because I want to focus purely on my artwork. I don't really care about the repeats yet, and I'll be using that preview a little bit later to make sure that what I'm creating does create the pattern that I intend. Let me zoom in a little bit closer on this artwork. I'm just going to press Command Spacebar or Control Spacebar and zoom in on this. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to kind of chisel off some of the corners here. I'm going to do that by creating another rectangle. I'm actually going to Option click on the center point right here of this rectangle. I'm going to create a rectangle that measures 1 1/4 inches square. And then I'm going to double click on the Rotate tool and rotate it 45 degrees and click OK. Next, I'll switch to my Selection tool and I'll marquee select both of these rectangles. I basically want to chop off the corners here and get rid of the parts that I don't want. And I would be using the Shape Builder tool in the normal circumstances, but the Shape Builder tool doesn't actually work when you're in pattern definition mode. So I'm going to have to resort to the regular Pathfinder command. I'm going to go over to the window menu. I'll scroll down to where it says Pathfinder, and I'll choose the Divide option. That will kind of chop everything up into visual pieces. And now I could use my Direct Selection tool to go ahead and select these elements and delete them. So now, let's get the last one here. That leaves me with the shape that I'm looking for. There is one more thing that I want to do. I want to create two vertical lines that go through the middle. And again, by looking at solar panels in my reference material, I know that that's how they appear. So I'm going to take my line segment tool. I'm going to start here. Because I have smart guides turned on, it's easy to snap to this anchor point here. I'm going to click and drag down holding the Shift key until it snaps to the second anchor point. Now I'm going to change the stroke color here to white. I'm also going to change the stroke weight to 2 points. Now I want to nudge it over just a little bit from here. I know that my keyboard increment is set to 1 pixel, or 1 point, so I'm just going to tap the right arrow key on my keyboard a few times to move it over. I'm going to keep count of it. Remember, each time that I tap, it's 1 point, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That actually looks pretty good. So I'll take my selection tool here. I'll press Command, click on the anchor point, hold down my Option and Shift keys, drag them over to that right side of this over here so it snaps to this anchor point, release the mouse, let go of the modifier keys, and then tap my left arrow the same number of times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm actually going to select both of these right now, and I'm going to choose to go to the Object menu, Path, and outline the stroke. And this converts those two lines that I've created and converts them to filled objects. I can also combine them into one shape by going to the Object menu, choosing Compound Path, and then Make. Now the reason why I've done that is because I can now select this background object. So now I basically have two objects selected. I can go back to the window menu and open my Pathfinder panel, and I could choose this option here called minus front. And by doing that, I now basically get rid of these areas right here so they're filled with none. At this point, I'm just going to click over here to deselect my pattern. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here so I can see more of my screen. And now I want to turn those copies back on. Let's go back to 5x5. And now I can preview how that pattern is going to look when I use it as a fill inside of some kind of a shape. So it actually looks great. I'm happy with the way that it looks. I can now go to this gray bar here at the top of my window, and I can choose Done. So there, that's all that it was. I now have defined a pattern inside of Illustrator. If I look at my swatches panel, I can see over here that I have the solar cells pattern swatch. So I'm going to zoom out just a bit here, Command minus or Control minus, and I want to select this shape right here, which is the border around the solar energy part of the infographic. What I'd like to do is put the pattern fill into this shape. So I'm going to go over here to the fill icon and choose the solar cells pattern for this shape. Now, I actually define this pattern as black. So why does it not appear that way right now? In fact, on your screen, it may appear as black. So let's take a quick look at the Appearance panel. I'm going to double click on the Appearance panel. Let me actually drag it out here so we can take a better look at it. And you can see that right now, this object here has a full strength stroke, but it has a fill, which I just defined. But that fill has its own opacity, which is set to 5% and multiply. I'm actually going to go ahead now and click on the word opacity, set its opacity back to 100, and set its blend mode back to normal. So this might be how you actually see this when you apply it. But in any case, I just want you to learn how to be able to do this, because what I'm basically focusing on here is the ability to actually color a fill and a stroke completely different. You see, I want my stroke to be full strength. I want it to be a nice solid orange, but the background should be tinted back. I don't want it to get in the way of everything else. It makes everything else hard to read. So in my Appearance panel, I can basically toggle the button here for the fill to see the opacity setting. Click on the opacity setting, and of course, anything that I change now applies specifically to the fill, not to the stroke. So I want to change my opacity to 5%, and I'm going to change the blend mode to multiply. So now I can move my Appearance panel back over here where it belongs, next to the graphic styles. And I've successfully been able to add a pattern background for the solar energy. Now let's focus on the wind energy part. And you know, as I said before, you don't have to feel pressured to always create everything from scratch inside of Illustrator. Being an efficient designer is all about trying to find ways to repurpose things or to customize them the way that you might need. I'm going to go to the swatches panel because Illustrator actually ships with many libraries of sample patterns. If I click on the library icon right here, I can see that there are different color swatches, but there are also patterns here, things for basic graphics or decorative, and I looked through a few of these, and there are actually some interesting patterns that might work well for wind energy inside of the Decorative Legacy library. Just to show you, by the way, there's also an entire library here called Vonster Patterns. These are actually created by Von Glitschka, who has a course here at lynda.com called Drawing Vector Graphics. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you take a look at it. But in our case here, for our example, his patterns don't really fit that well. So I'm going to choose the Decorative Legacy library. Now, this is an external library, meaning that these swatches now are not part of my existing document. But if I click on any of these swatches, for example, there's one here called Waves Smooth Color. If I click on it, you can see that Illustrator now adds it to my swatches panel. So now I can close it. I don't need this anymore. I can select this object right here, and for its fill, I can now choose that Wave Smooth Color pattern. Again, if I look at my Appearance panel now, I can see that the fill has its own opacity setting. It's set to 20% opacity and also set to multiply. So again, it lets that nice waves pattern fade to the background, and it doesn't get in the way of everything else. So at this point, we've been able to create 2 pattern backgrounds to add a little bit of extra flavor to this part of the infographic. We created a solar panel from scratch, and we used some of the sample patterns to help us be a little bit more efficient as well. So let's go ahead and go to the File menu and choose to save this document. I'm going to choose Save As. Let's name this one 07. Click on the Save button, and then in the dialog, click OK. And we're ready to start adding some charts that cover both solar and wind energy.